Hey guys, it's Andrew from Pecksmetalpicks. Today I'm going to be talking about August Burns Red's 7th album, Phantom Anthem. Took me a couple tries to get through that. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time saying that combination of words. But anyway, look, I have a lot of things that I want to talk about in this album, and so I'm just going to jump into the review. So first of all, I'm going to let you know this is probably going to be my album of the year. Nothing's coming to mind in terms of what's better than it. I don't really expect anything else that's coming out to be better than it. And I know that I said Wage War's Deadweight album was an album of the year contender, but honestly, man, when you hold them up side by side, August Burns Red has so much more going on, so much more substance, and it's almost like a different genre sort of thing, but honestly, it's just like not even close in my mind. I think ABR just blows it out of the water. I'm so impressed with this release. So I'm going to get into a little bit about why I think it's so great. So, leading up to this album being released, I actually expected it to be way more of a progressive album. And part of that is because a lot of their recent releases have been trending towards the progressive route. And the other part of that reason is because the single that they put out, Frost especially, is one of the most progressive songs that they've ever made, especially instrumentally. And so I was actually pleasantly surprised to see so many of their metalcore roots playing such a prominent role. The reason that I think this album is so successful is they figured out how to make the progressive sound that they had on Rescue and Restore, and they figured out how to combine that with the metalcore elements that they had back in Messengers and Constellations. So for me personally, I think Phantom Anthem is definitely the best thing that August Burns Red has put out since Constellations. And that's saying a lot, because they've had a lot of releases since then. But like, for instance, in Found in Faraway Places, that album, they sort of mixed the two elements, the two styles a little bit, but they kind of segmented them and kept them like unique in their own songs. The thing about Phantom Anthem that's so great is that they combined the elements of Messengers and the elements of Rescue and Restore. God, so many albums, I'm mixing them all up. But basically, to say it simpler, they combined the great things about their metalcore elements, and they combined the great things from the progressive side of their music. And that came out in Phantom Anthem, and I think that's why it's so good. It opens up so many new, exciting possibilities, especially because before it seemed like they were really just going down this progressive path, and it kind of seemed like we knew where that was headed, but now that they brought in this mixture, I think it really rejuvenates their music and opens up a lot of exciting possibilities. One of my favorite things, for sure, in Phantom Anthem is the return of the rolling breakdowns. And it's tough to really describe what I mean by a rolling breakdown. A great example is at the end of Quake. It's kind of when the breakdown comes in and hits, and then it's not a slow one at all. It's really fast, and it just sort of carries you through the next 30 seconds like a wave. I want to say there's one at the end of Invisible Enemy too, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, oh my god, August Burns Red, the rolling breakdowns is such a staple of their early material, especially on Messengers. A lot of you guys who are familiar with that album will know exactly what I'm talking about. So I was really excited to hear that. Basically, listening to this album, it doesn't seem like there are any weak songs. I can easily imagine every song on this album being a fan favorite at one point or another. And that's how you know it's an album of the year contender. It does an amazing job of summing up everything before it. Like I was saying, all the elements of their previous albums are included in this one and blended together in a way that makes it all really fresh and exciting. Especially compared to the way that they had sort of tried to do it in Found in Faraway Places. I think this album does it much better. I'm especially pleased that they kept a little bit of the spoken word element. They started doing that a lot in Rescue and Restore. And personally, I thought it was a little bit too much back then. I thought it was a little bit overbearing and kind of annoying, to be honest, to slow the music down that much and do the spoken word stuff. I never really felt like that fit the August Burns Red vibe and like their overall sound. But they've toned it back a lot in this album, and I think they've included the perfect amount, basically. You know, it's definitely there, but it's not annoyingly so like it was before. So they definitely figured that out. It also seems like the band figured out how to properly utilize Dustin's vocals. He does the intermittent sort of like high-pitched screams. Definitely sounds different than Jake, and I feel like that is the highlight of it. I think, especially on Found in Faraway Places and Rescue and Restore, they were experimenting a little bit with what they wanted Dustin to be in the band and trying to figure out the role that his vocals should play. And I don't think that those ones ever really figured it out, but I feel like Phantom Anthem, they finally hit the nail on the head and decided what Dustin should be, and I think this is what he should be too, and what I think it is that one, his vocals should be used to emphasize Jake's, and two, as short little bursts that sort of pop up at unexpected times to sort of surprise the listener and add a little bit of like a wow effect. That's really the best way that I can put it. I don't think that Dustin should be anywhere near like on par with Jake in terms of like their vocal contributions, and I think that this album really did that well. Figured out exactly where Dustin should be and where he shouldn't be, and I feel like previously they hadn't quite figured out where he shouldn't be yet, but now it seems like they have. So overall, to wrap up the positives of the album, I could pretty much sum it up by saying that Phantom Anthem has a lot of the best elements of every album that came before this. It's sort of like the summing up of and the combination of all of their previous work, all brought together and blended together and mixed perfectly to create, you know, the 11 songs on this album. That being said, I know I said this was the album of the year for me. Doesn't mean that I can't have a complaint about it, and this is it. My only complaint about the album is that there are a ridiculous amount of interludes. A ridiculous amount. Literally every single song except for Quake has an interlude. And some of them have more than one interlude, and I'm going to get into a couple highlight songs in just a minute. Some of them have more than one interlude. Some of them have an intro and an interlude, or a outro and an interlude. Holy cow, there's so many interludes. So the reason, like, to say this is one thing, but the reason that this is a complaint I'll get into now. They've been doing it more and more lately. With each album, it seems like they've been doing it more than before. And it's becoming a little bit more and more of a detractor for me. In the beginning, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, you know, spicing things up. But the more they do it, the more sort of annoying it is to me. And the reason is because it basically cuts the songs in half. For as original as August Burns Red is, and for groundbreaking, and just all of those, you know, great adjectives you can use to describe them, to show that they've been a pioneer in metalcore, the way that they've been using their interludes has not been any of those things. It's really predictable. You can see it coming from a mile away, especially in this album, and it sort of just puts the brakes on the song. You know what I mean? It's like as soon as you get really into it, you're 2 minutes in, it's, you know, getting real fast and heavy, and then all of a sudden it just hits you with this interlude, and it just kind of cuts the song in half and makes it, in my opinion, it prevents the album from really feeling like it's hitting its stride. You know, it seems like interruptions are happening in every single song. The only exception to that is Quake, and that one is just fast and hard-hitting the entire time, and for that reason, almost alone, Quake is probably my favorite song on the album, just because there's no fluff in it, and I know that saying like filler material and fluff and things like that is sort of like has a negative connotation, and I don't really mean for it to be that way, because for instance, it's fine. Like, the interludes are good. They are skillful. One of them is even a drum solo sort of interlude, which is cool because it like carries into the breakdown and what follows after that. So that's kind of cool. You know, I'm not taking away from the musicianship at all. I'm just sort of thinking about the album as like a cohesive unit, and it just seems like there's all of these stops and interruptions and having to pause for these filler moments that although cool in the individual songs, I feel like sort of take away from the album as a whole. Personally, I would rather see them do it sort of like, instead of having them in the middle, maybe do more intros or do more outros, more build-up kind of things, like how they did in like Mariana's Trench. I thought that was really cool. Or maybe it's Meridian. I always get those two mixed up because they're on Constellations and they're both pretty long. But anyway, my point is just I wish they'd switch it up a little bit and kind of knock it off with all the interludes. Other than that, such a good album. Such a fan. Still album of the year, you know, despite the interludes, so that's really saying something. I'll just briefly touch on a couple of the songs. I know this is going on already for a while. So one, King of Sorrow, album opener, really sets the tone, fast, heavy, reminds me a lot of Messengers. When I first heard that, I got really excited because I had only heard the singles, which I never really thought had too much metalcore in them. So to start off the album with King of Sorrow really got me hyped to hear the rest of it. After that, The Frost is probably my next favorite one in terms of like the order. I'm going in order of the song's appearances. Honestly, The Frost sounds like it would be off their Christmas album. It leans a lot more towards the progressive side, which is also really cool. And it kind of continues August Burns Red's tradition of having like a weird theme that Jake can dance to during live performances. And if you've ever seen August Burns Red, you know exactly what I mean when he does like the salsa dance, and like each album sort of has a moment, and The Frost is the song that has this moment. After that, Invisible Enemy. This one's up there with Quake in terms of my favorite tracks. Has a Japanese-sounding intro, which is pretty badass. Has some high screams from Jake, which I'm always a fan of, having those in metalcore. Actually has a lot of different vocal styles. Has a lot of lows, too, which is really cool. Invisible Enemy is also the one that has Matt Griner's drum interlude, which is pretty cool. You should definitely pay attention to that. And if that's not enough reason to check it out, then also the music video for it is super funny. It's like puppets and they're playing. It's really cool. Really, that part is really original. Pretty big fan of that. After that is Quake. It's one of the fastest tracks. It has probably the most sections. Either that or Dangerous, actually. Either Quake or Dangerous is the one that reminds me the most of Messengers, which is great because it has the crazy rolling breakdowns. It's a ton of fun. And the good thing about Quake, which I said, is it doesn't have an interlude, which I think is probably the highlight of it. Generations, moving on to the longest song, opens up with some of the coolest vocals Jake has on the album. A lot of cool things mixed together. I think this is the one that has Dustin's biggest contribution in terms of his vocals, which I really like his little feature on this song as well. Getting close to the end, Float has a pretty interesting opener. Really drew me in the first time I heard it. I thought it was pretty cool. The first minute sounds a lot like Constellations, which is cool, and overall it's just a pretty fast song. And then lastly, Dangerous. The heavy part's probably the most similar thing from Messengers that's on this album. The breakdown at the end is one of my favorites, if not my actual favorite, and it comes in pretty unexpectedly and hits you way harder than you'd expect. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this album. I don't really have too much more to say other than that. I'm just trying to think of what else could possibly give this thing a run for its money. I haven't paid that much attention to Counterpart's new album. I've listened to it a couple times, and it didn't blow me away the way that Phantom Anthem did. So I really think this might be the #1 spot, and I think a lot of people are going to feel that way. I don't know, guys. That's pretty much it. Let me know what you think. If there's an album you want to see me review that you think could potentially beat this one out for a #1 spot. Other than that, I just really appreciate the support. I finally got my new room set up, got the lighting, and got some flags on the wall. And hopefully I'll do a couple more of these throughout the rest of the year. But I just really appreciate your guys' support, man. This YouTube stuff, it's pretty cool because it feels like I'm back to the small community aspect, which I miss a lot from the early days of beginning to do all of this music stuff. So feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff, or do none of it. I just appreciate the views and appreciate your time that you take out of your day to watch this stuff. So thanks again, guys, and hopefully I'll see you soon.